And yeah, so something in that neighborhood.
That's right about the time, honestly, that I started to get serious about Linux was about 2012. Up to that point, I had played with it, and I used to keep it running in virtual machines to play with, and then about 2012 was when I decided, okay, it's time to devote this to hardware.
There you
That's
go. Yeah.
about that time, yeah.
And I mean that devoting it to the hardware, that's the big movement, right? That is the
Yeah,
big deal.
I had a laptop that was worthless on Windows 7, and it was like a dual core. I don't remember whether it was an Acer or an Asus, some cheap low end laptop, and it just did. It was horribly buggy on Windows 7, and I installed Linux on it, and it had AMD graphics in it, and it worked. It worked well enough to actually be useful. But my story with Linux actually goes back to Unix. Um, when my first real job out of school, I went to work for a radio station, WTAR and WLTY in Norfolk, and this would have been the summer of 1989. And they had a Unix mini frame running basis, and they had terminals all over the building. So this was the standard Unix model of one big machine, and everybody has an account, and you could log in, and you could get what you needed to get done with it. It was green screen monitors. It was the basic use of the machine was to process what the news wires sent. So we had API, UPI, and CBS radios print newswire all coming in at once. And so there you could see those, and you could print stories. Also had word processing, and there was some other things on it, but it was like a standard Unix system. And so while Linus Torvalds was creating the Linux kernel, I was using Unix every day, but I was not an administrator. I just had a user account, and I did nothing to maintain the computer. I think I only walked back and looked at it twice, the entire like 4 years I worked at that place, because I wasn't that terribly interested in it, to tell you the truth. It was just something I had to do at work. And anyway, later on, much later on, the next time that I uh, saw Linux or thought about Linux or Unix or anything like it was this would have been 1999. I went to work for Gateway Computer in Hampton, and they had a computer lab at that particular factory, and they had a machine in there that was running Linux, Open Caldera Linux, and that was the first time I ever saw it running. And I started learning about it, and that's when I heard about this thing called Linux, and it was a free operating system, and it worked like Unix, which I loved Unix. I liked that model of logging into the terminal and everything, and I was like, oh, I can do this on my home PC. This is cool. But it still took about 5 or 6 years before I actually started to download and play with Linux. I actually got a book. This would have been around 2000. It was a Sam's book called Learn Linux in 10 Minutes. And they were teaching Open Caldera in there. I still have the book. And that was my introduction to it. But it took a long time before I downloaded it. The first Linux that I actually downloaded installed was Ubuntu. So that would have been 2006 or 2007. And I immediately took it off the computer because I couldn't make it do anything. And I got very frustrated with it. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. And, I was very typical. At that time, I would have been a Windows user for many, many years and doing Windows stuff at work with networks and whatnot. So I didn't understand what I was looking at, got frustrated with it, stopped, playing with it. But it wouldn't go away. It was always, I got curious, and I went, well, maybe, hold on, let's try that one more time. I kept reinstalling it and uninstalling it and playing with it and getting frustrated with it. And like I said, it's been like that ever since. I don't personally own a Windows machine. I have one that is for my work that I have, but I haven't actually had Windows that I own and maintain since 2014. So that's kind of how it was. And then in 2012, like I said, I put it on a laptop, but then my main machine was Windows. I dumped that in 2014, and I've never looked back.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like me in 2017, where I'm like, you know what, that's it. I'm going to stay on Linux. Now, I do have a Windows machine still kicking around that I actually maintain. I maintain a whole one Windows 10 box for some Windows 10 or Windows only software, but almost everything I do is on Linux or Mac OS anymore. So I'm in the Unix family.
My day job at the radio station requires that I have a Windows machine, so it's their machine that's sitting on my desk. It's not even on my local network, so it's like it's all firewalled off. You can't even see it on the network.
It's in its own little corner of the world, and it can't talk to anything
Yep,
else. Yep.
exactly. And then when I actually log into it, I immediately VPN into the network at the radio station anyway. So it's totally not doesn't share anything locally. And if I do have to take something from a Linux machine and put it in the Windows machine, I have a USB drive and just I do it, physically. I don't ever those machines don't talk to each other. And that's how I prefer to do it. And that way, if I for some reason, lose or quit my job, whatever, all I got to do is box the crap up, send it back and say, "Here's your computer," and there's nothing personal on it.